it up!
Blasted off from Mayor Modello's planet in his spaceship, he looked back to see the entire place blinking with colored lights in sync with Modello's mood ring. The disgraced mayor was having a colossal temper tantrum after being exposed as a total fraud with the Modello complex. He had actually dethroned King Napoleon Bonaparte himself, and the term is now known as a Modello ego complex. The planet's lights flashed angrily as Modello stomped his feet and cried like a spoiled child. His mood ring was an extension of himself both metaphorically and literally, although he would try to convince you the lights were connected to a sound sensor of some sort. Classic Modello. Anthony chuckled and punched in the coordinates for the mysterious Wacko's Radish Ranch from the map that had fallen out of his pocket. A radish farm with exactly 17 rose bushes, a banana tree for shade, and a giant pile of fertilizer? This ought to be interesting, he thought. Anthony thought about stopping by the planet of Modello's brother-in-law, Dennis the Menace on the planet DCFS. Or definitely can't freaking science. But that is a story for a different day. Upon landing, Anthony was greeted by a woman in a perma Santa hat loudly introducing herself as Wacko, Master Gardener Extraordinaire. She immediately launched into an incredibly detailed story about planting her first radish seed at age 3, recanting every detail with the color of a Shakespearean sonnet. I can still taste the earthy tones of the soil as I gently pushed the tiny, russet-hued seedling into the loamy darkness, she declared in an overly poetic voice. My small, pudgy fingers caressed the sugary roundness as it emerged weeks later, blushing scarlet like egg. That's great, Anthony interrupted, having zoned out after the first few lines. So where are these famous radish fields of yours? Wacko smiled widely and gestured around them with a grand flourish. Why, you're standing in them, my dear boy. As far as the eye can see, seas of nutrient-rich planter boxes overflow with my bold, pungent bounty. Anthony couldn't help but stare at her third eye, which was bouncing around like a ping ball as soon as she said as far as the eye can see. Anthony said, let's take a look in detail together. Let's make sure we cross all our T's and dot our lowercase J's. Anthony looked around in confusion at the endless waves of weeds and overgrown vegetation surrounding them. He also couldn't help but notice the lack of any banana tree, rose bushes, or massive fertilizer pile. I don't see any radish crops, he said slowly. Just a lot of scraggly plants? Ah, but you're not looking closely enough. Wacko insisted, waving a hand pompously. Those lush vines are my award-winning Tokushima squash. And that forest of towering green fronds? A veritable jungle of my world-famous, Pat's quintuple butterhead lettuce. She prattled on, but Anthony had stopped listening. Something was scratching and scurrying in the tall grass around them. He narrowed his eyes as a rat the size of a small dog poked its whiskered snout through the vegetation, followed by dozens more. And over there, why, that's where I house my generous rabbits. Wacko yammered, oblivious. You know, The philanthropist rabbits who selflessly gift their delicious droppings for my organic fertilizer program. Those aren't rabbits, Anthony said, feeling a bead of sweat roll down his temple. Those are rats. Giant, terrifying rats. The rodents closed in around them, bearing their massive yellow incisors. Wacko finally seemed to notice and let out a small eep. Oh dear, it would appear my invasive species preservation center has grown a tad out of control, she chuckled nervously. I simply can't keep up with these rapacious little darlings. As the first wave of rats lunged toward them, Anthony grabbed the befuddled Wacko and booked it back to his ship, the endless squeaks and scratching following behind. Once they blasted off, he turned to the kooky woman and raised an eyebrow. Invasive Species Preservation Center? He asked flatly. Let me guess. You got fired as Master Gardener years ago and this whole Radish ranch tale was utter nonsense? Wacko's face fell as she removed her Santa hat, wringing it in her hands contritely. You got me, she sighed. I'm just a lonely old lady who makes up stories to feel important. Everyone else left this godforsaken rat planet years ago when I refused to deal with the infestation. Now it's just me, some very ornery rose bushes, and 0.17 of them to be exact. Anthony shook his head, wondering just how many more deranged liars were waiting out in this crazy cosmos. At least this one seemed relatively harmless, if more than a little unhinged. Why 17? He asked, unable to resist the non sequitur. Oddly specific number of rose bushes. Wacko seemed relieved he hadn't completely written her off as a lunatic. She shrugged and offered a small smile. You know, as gardeners, we just have an eye for little details like that.